Right, so we're going to be adding some lovely colour to our snail's body now. And I'm going to be using this lovely, vibrant Cadbury's kind of purple, but you can choose any colour you want. And all I'm doing, it's a merino roving wool, so it's nice and kind of hair-like in its texture. And I'm just separating it very carefully from the rest of the wool. So I've got this very long piece that's about 1 centimetre in width. And I'm just going to fold the purple piece of merino around what's effectively going to be the neck of our snail, and I'm going to fold it round so that it's quite tight, so I've got a slight indent there signifying where the neck is. And I'm just going to use my needles, my fine needles, and just felt that down just to tack it into place so it's not going to unravel. And then once I've tacked that down, I'm just going to take the ends and just bring those round to the rest of the where we're going to have our head, and I'm just going to tack those into place as well. And it just makes a lovely secure sculpture by doing this, and I'm using my fine needles one over the other so they're following the line of the wool where we're placing the wool on our snail's body. So I'm just going to felt down those last fluffy bits there. And once they're all felted, we can then start to wrap the rest of the wool around the body. So I've just got that annoying end there. I'm just going to felt that down. So we've got a nice smooth start. Then I'm going to hold the wool, the merino wool, nice and close, and I'm going to twist it round so it actually does indent the pink wool that we've already felted down for our snail's body. And I'm holding it very closely, as you can see, because we don't want to hold it, like we said in module 1, too far away, because that's when the wool breaks. So you want to keep your fingers nice and close to where that wool is being wrapped around, and then take it all the way down to the end of the tail. And then I'm just going to felt that down again, just to make sure that nothing's going to unravel and we can keep that nice taut wrap around the snail's body. And I'm just going to keep felting this, bringing the wool around to the end, so we've got a nice, smooth and professional finish. So I'm just going to bring that round again, and I'm just going to do almost like a cross, and I'm just going to felt that down. We're not going to take it past the other piece that we've wrapped, so we haven't got a cross. It kind of just neatly tucks away that end. And I'm just going to felt that last piece of wool into the wool we've already wrapped, so nobody will notice that there's any joins or anything when they come to look at the piece. I'm just going to tear away some of that excess because I've got a bit too much there, and then I'm just going to felt down those last stray ends that we have there. Still using my fine needles, and I'm not going down too deeply into the body. I'm probably taking my needles about 2 to 3 millimeters into the sculpture. So a nice light felt, but obviously deep enough so that you can felt that wool down. And I'm just going to speed things up for you here because you know what you're doing now in terms of the felting side of things. Ensuring that you're obviously felting with one needle over the other. You don't want them side by side here because then you'll end up with a strange shape to your worm body. So you want to kind of felt with the lines of the purple merino roving. So now that's all felted down. So I'm just going to now start creating the eyes for our piece. So I've got some merino, I've got some Gotland wool bats that I'm going to use to make the eyes, and I'm just going to separate this in half, and then I'm just going to separate this piece again. So I've got 2 relatively equal pieces of Gotland wool bats, and I'm just going to measure that for you so you can see how long a piece I have. So it's measuring approximately 5 inches in length, and it's probably about 1/2 inch to 1 inch in width. And I'm just going to roll this like we rolled our balls earlier on in the course. So we're just creating 2 simple ball shapes that we're going to felt down in a moment. So I'm just holding it nice and close in my fingers so it can't unravel. And then I'm just folding it over and turning it as I go, just to create that ball shape. And then once we start felting it down with our fine felting needles, the ball will really start to take shape. So I'm going to just get rid of this excess here because I don't really need that much wool. I don't want my eyes to be too big. However, you may want really large eyes. So it really is up to you as to how big you want to go. It doesn't really make any difference to how the sculpture looks in the end. As long as you like it and your customer likes it, if you're selling it, that's the main thing. So I'm just going to tack this down to ensure that it can't unravel. And I'm using my thumb and my forefinger nails as a shield so that I don't stab myself. And I just keep stabbing into the wool very gently, taking your time. If you rush, that's when mistakes are made and you stab yourself. So just make sure you take your time and felt everything down. And once you've got to a stage where you think your ball's starting to feel a bit firmer, and it's getting to a point that you think you'd be happy to felt it onto your piece, you just want to give it a little roll with your fingers just to ensure that you're getting that nice spherical shape to it. So I'm just giving it a roll now, and the warmth of your hands will also help those fibres to muddle together. So I'm just going to make the second eye now, doing exactly the same thing as I did a moment ago with the first eye. So rolling the wool, holding it very closely in my fingers and rolling it over at different angles to ensure that nice spherical shape that we learnt in Module 1. So once all the wool's been folded over, I'm just going to tack it down and then just keep very gently felting. Obviously this is sped up, I didn't actually felt it this quickly, until you get two eyes that are about equal in size. So now I'm just going to place those onto my snail's body just to see where I want them to be positioned. So you could have them close together or you could have them slightly apart. It really is, again, entirely up to you. It's your sculpture, you choose how you want this piece to look. So I'm going to felt down my first eye using a single needle, and it's difficult to see, but I'm felting in a downward motion. So I'm holding the eye at the top with my forefinger and then felting on a downward angle into the head of the worm so that eye can't go anywhere. Once the ball's not going to move, you can then start to take your finger away. I'm just using my finger here because it just gives me a bit more control over how I want the eye to be positioned. And what I'm doing, I'm really concentrating on the base of the eye and I'm pushing the wool inwards so I've still got that rounded look to the eye. What you don't want to do is felt it all down and going straight through the middle of the eye, because then you end up with kind of like a squashed look and you lose that roundness. So focus your felting at the base of where you've placed the eye. So you're felting the base and the top of the head into each other. And that will help you to keep that nice spherical look. So again, I've sped things up again because you know what you're doing. And just take your time. And once you get to a stage where, what I tend to do is just give them a bit of a nudge with my finger just to see if they're going to go anywhere. And once I'm happy that they're nice and stable and they're not going to accidentally come off, that is when I stop. So I'm just giving another felt around the base of that eye just to make sure it's lovely and secure. And I'm just checking now as well to make sure both of my eyes are symmetrical, because I want a symmetrical look. But if you wanted to, you could go for one really large eye and one really small eye. That could give a really cool, quirky look to your snail when it's finished as well. So again, it's really entirely up to you. So I'm just giving them a bit of a squeeze because I want them to be close together. And I think I'm happy with that. I'm just going to felt down the nose a bit because I want a slightly flatter nose area to my snail. And I'm happy with that. That's nice and flat. I think I'm happy with that. That looks good. So the next thing I'm going to do is add some brown merino roving. So again, I'm just taking a small pinch of the brown merino roving, and I'm just going to roll it in between my fingers using the warmth of my hands and my fingers to muddle those fibres together. And then I'm going to do the same thing again with the second piece. You want 2 equal pieces, so it's best to start off with 1 piece and then separate them in half, so you've got roughly the same amount of wool for each eye. And this bit can be quite tricky, so take your time and be patient. So I'm just going to move this piece over to the side, and we're going to use that piece in a moment for the snail's mouth. So I'm just going to take my snail and I'm just going to place that brown merino where I want it to be. The trick with this is to not felt too deeply. If you felt too deeply, what will happen as you're felting the brown into the white is that the brown will get stuck on the needle and you won't actually be able to get it felted into the white of the eye. Whereas if you do very light felting movements, very light stabbing movements as you're felting that brown merino into the white Gotland wool bats, you'll find that it felts down a lot more easily. So this can be tricky as well because you're trying to create a similar sized piece on each side of the eye, on both eyes, so that you've got this symmetrical finish. And sometimes, because wool kind of does what it wants to, that can be quite tricky, and you might need to just add a little bit more brown wool just to make sure that both sides look the same. So I'm just going to take my second piece of brown merino roving now, and I'm just going to felt that into place. And you can see what I mean, it kind of tends to want to move wherever it wants to go, so you just need to be patient. Don't bend your needles, just use very small stabbing motions, very shallow stabbing motions, and you should be able to get it into place. So I'm just kind of moving the wool over with my needle, and once I've got it into position, that's when I stab it down. And again, just take your time. And you can end up sometimes, because it's a merino, you can end up with this kind of like sort of bits of the wool kind of going off, and you can end up with a slightly jaggedy edge. So just use your needle just to poke that into place like I am here, to get a nice smooth finish. So I'm just felting that down. Oh, he's escaping. I'm just going to take a little bit more of that brown merino. Only a tiny bit, not lots. I'm just going to roll it between my fingers again, and I'm just going to place that onto the eye of my snail, or soon-to-be snail. And then I'm just going to felt that down because I want them to be a bit larger, I think, the pupils of my snail. And you can make this as large or as small as you want to. It really, again, depends on the kind of look that you're going for. I want to get them a bit larger, but you could make them smaller if you want to. The nice thing about making the brown element of the eye larger is that you could also add in a bit of white if you wanted to, and give your snail that even more realistic finish. And you can see I'm kind of very carefully moving the wool into position. And you can really see that he's taking form in terms of his character. He's starting to get his personality. Okay, so I'm just going to take that second brown piece. I'm just going to add that onto the opposite side and felt that down into place as well. And you could make a whole collection of these if you enjoyed making them. They're great for things like tree decorations as well. They're something a bit more quirky and a bit different to the average Christmas tree decoration. Like I said earlier, you could make a bookworm, you could make a mobile out of them, and I'm going to show you how to make mobiles later in the course as well. So they're a really versatile, easy to make creature. Once you've got this down, making the snail or the worm, they're super fun and super quick to make. So I'm just going to push that brown over to the side because it doesn't really look very much like the other side at the moment. And you just keep going until you're happy really with the overall look of your snail. So it might be that you don't particularly want anything symmetrical, in which case this will be even quicker to do because you don't need to worry about the symmetry and getting everything looking exact. So I'm just trying to manipulate that wool round so I can get that shape that I'm desiring. And you can add hair to these as well, which is also really fun and gives it a bit of a look of the worm in Labyrinth. If anyone's watched Jim Henson's Labyrinth, or was it George Lucas's Labyrinth? Jim Henson and George Lucas's Labyrinth, and you've got the little worm in it, and he kind of goes, hello. He looks a little bit like him, I guess. So I'm just going to add a bit more wool on this side because I'm finding that the other side is a bit larger, so I'm just going to keep adding the wool. And that's the joy of needle felting. If it doesn't quite look right, you can just add a little bit more wool wherever you need it just to balance things out. It's always easier to add wool than it is to start with too much though. So I always start with less than you need and then just add in, and it's much easier then to control how much wool you're using and the overall look of whatever it is you're creating. But it is such a versatile art and it really is so incredibly forgiving when you do make mistakes. Okay, starting to get there. Just going to give that more of a rounded look to that eye there. And then I think we're nearly there. And then the next stage will be to add the light into his eyes, the little kind of white part that we want to add to make him look a bit more like he's alive and he's about to talk to us and say hello. Just giving it a final stab in the middle, just to get it all nicely integrated into the piece. And it's always important to look at your sculpture at all angles, because in one angle it can look symmetrical and good, and then you'll look at it at another angle and it might look a bit wonky. So always look at your sculpture at sort of 360 degrees, really sort of turn it around and make sure everything looks great from whatever side you look at it. Especially if you're selling things, because then when people take photographs of your piece, you know that it's going to look good at whatever angle that they photograph it at. So now I'm going to add some more tiny amounts of white into the brown area of the eye to create the appearance of light shining in his eye, or reflecting in his eye, I should say. So you want the tiniest of pinches, really small, and then I'm just rubbing those pieces of the white Gotland wool bats again between my fingers until I've got two very small white balls. And this can take a bit longer than the merino because the Gotland's got that much more loftier, thicker, fibrous feel to it. Okay, so now I've got my tiny dots. What I'm going to do is place one of them roughly in the middle of the brown merino wool that we've already added, and using the same technique I'm going to lightly stab that into place against the brown. I kind of want to felt them down so that there's not lots of white there, but it's just like a hint of white, just to kind of give that lovely characterful look to the piece. And I'm going to keep felting it down until I've got more brown wool than white wool in that particular area. That's starting to look good. And I might need to just give it a bit of a tweak just to make sure in a moment that the other piece again is symmetrical. So I'm just going to felt that second white piece down. Again, still using the light, shallow stabbing motion. And you just want to keep going until you've reached roughly the same size as the other piece. And I think we're nearly there, just a few more stabs I think to get that looking the same size as the other piece of white. Just check it out at the other angle and give it another stab down. Just doing some very slow, precise stabbing motions just to make sure that everything's positioned correctly. I'm just going to check that and make sure it looks good. I think I'm happy with that. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add his smile. But it doesn't have to be a smile. It could be a frown if you wish, if you want him to be a glum snail. So I'm just going to separate this piece out because I want it to be quite a fine piece of the brown merino roving to create a fine smile to our snail. I don't want it to be too thick because sometimes I think the thicker things are, the more false they look. And I like things to look natural. So this is where you position where you want your smile or your mouth to go. So I could have it here, or I could change its position and I can have it here and make him look a bit sad. Or I could bring it up a bit. So this is a good time to kind of mess around and think about how you want your snail to look. So I'm going to keep it there. I'm just going to hold it in place with my thumb and my forefinger, trying to keep it relatively taut, and then I'm just going to lightly stab that into place using shallow stabbing motions. And once it's stabbed into position, I can then let that piece go and get my fingers out of the way so I can stab it a bit more ferociously. And I should say that I'm using my medium single needle to do this. And you can go for a really wide smile if you want to, or you can keep the smile a bit more narrow. So it really does depend, again, on the kind of look you want to go for. But the key with mouths is, again, you want to try and keep them even. You don't want there to be kind of a thicker bit of wool and then a thinner bit of wool, because again, it looks a bit amateur and it doesn't look quite as sort of, I don't want to say realistic because there's nothing realistic about this snail, but it doesn't give the appearance of professionalism or like, you know, again, it could kind of talk to you if it wanted to. So I'm just felting those loose ends over that were kind of hanging out at the edges. I'm just felting them into the mouth. And once I've felted the first side, I'm just going to do the same thing with the other side. So I'm just going to bring that over with my fingers because I'm happy with the length of the mouth. And I'm just going to felt that again over on itself into the same position. And once again, I'm just using that single needle and I'm very carefully, very lightly felting that extra piece round to the other side of the mouth because I want to have that deeply set within my sculpture, that mouth. So by using slightly more brown wool, it can be seen more clearly once the sculpture is finished. If I was just to use just the single piece and not fold it over onto itself, you probably wouldn't be able to see the mouth quite as clearly. So that's why I'm doing it like that. And then I'm just going to take my embroidery scissors and I'm just going to snip away that excess because I don't need to use any more wool within the mouth now. And then I'm going to take my single needle again and just felt in those last few stray strands. And I'm using a medium needle, medium twisted star needle again, but any medium needle will do really. I'm just speeding things up and I'm felting it down again, so I've kind of created this kind of indent where the smile is. I don't like things looking 2D. I want the mouth to be pushed in like it really could talk. I'm just going to add some smile dimples to either side of the mouth that we've created. So all I'm doing is just felting a little dent into the corner of where the mouth is. And when he's finished your snail, it will give him a really lovely, characterful look, and people really engage with that because people really respond to smiles. So I'm just giving a final felting to make sure everything looks good, everything's nice and integrated, and the walls nicely felted down so that it can't unravel or become loose. Okay, just do a final felt in those areas where we've popped those smile dimples, and you can see they look really effective, and that's good. We've finished the next stage of our snail, so let's move on to making his shell.